You're entitled to food, clothing, shelter, and medical attention. Anything else that you get is a privilege. This is what the Alcatraz Prison Regulation number 5. I'm going to share information about the history and occurrences of Alcatraz. Today I'll be talking about the prison life, prisoners, and the escapes. Alcatraz was a maximum security prison to deal with inmates that refused to behave in their prison. It was also one of the most dreaded prisons in its time, from 1850 as a military prison to 1963 ending up as a maximum security prison. The first warden of Alcatraz was James Johnson. HowStuffWorks.com said that he held the most discipline out of all the other wardens of Alcatraz's history. For his first 2 years, he started a talk ban for the prisoners. No prisoners were allowed to hum, sing, speak, or whistle. The inmates were not allowed to speak to each other at all, except for short periods of time. If they did speak out loud or if they misbehaved, they would be sent to D Block. D Block was where they would put the prisoners if they misbehaved. It was the solitary confinement, and the prisoners called it the hole. The D Block cells were in complete darkness. Men could go mad if being left in there for too long. Prisoners would mark that every New Year's Eve, they could hear parties going on the people's yachts by the mainland of San Francisco. Some of the inmates would say that hearing the parties and seeing the view of San Francisco was the worst punishment. The guards' families lived on Alcatraz. The wives and children would live in apartment buildings or houses for senior officers. On the island, they had a bowling alley, convenience store, and a soda fountain shop. The families would do most of their shopping on the mainland, however. Every day, the kids would ride a boat to the mainland to attend school. The warden would use inmates that behaved for cleaning and cooking their houses. One of the most famous inmates of Alcatraz was Robert Stroud, or more commonly known as Birdman. Bob.gov stated that he went to Alcatraz in 1942, but before he was later convicted of manslaughter and was sent to a prison in Washington. Stroud was very difficult to manage and very violent in his prison in Washington. On one occasion, he stabbed a fellow inmate. Stroud was sent to another prison in which he stabbed a guard to death. He was sentenced to death by hanging when his mother pleaded for his life, so instead they decided to have him be in total solitude. Stroud developed an interest in canaries after finding an injured bird outside. The warden allowed him to author 2 books on canaries and their diseases. He raised over 300 birds in his cells. And officials discovered that in his research, the equipment he used was being used to construct a still to make alcoholic brew. He was sent to Alcatraz in 1942, and he spent 6 years in segregation in D Block and 11 years in the prison hospital. Al Capone was another very famous prisoner in his time. Every day, the press flooded the office with phone calls asking about everything from how Capone liked the weather in Alcatraz to what he was doing at that moment. Before Capone went to Alcatraz, he was able to manipulate the wardens to work for him. His cell was carpeted and had expensive furniture. He had started his life of crime at a young age. He was involved in prostitution rings, bootlegging, and gambling houses. Capone was always able to manipulate the wardens of every prison until he went to Alcatraz. In Alcatraz, Capone tried to make deals with the guards into allowing him special privileges, but was denied. He quoted saying, "It looks like Alcatraz has got me licked." George Kelly, or more commonly known as Machine Gun Kelly, was probably one of the most famous gangsters from the Prohibition era. Kelly was a small-time criminal until he met his wife, Catherine Thorne. Catherine's influence made Kelly become a public enemy number 1. Machine Gun Kelly never actually killed anyone. His wife only made him practice with a machine gun. Catherine planned high-profile crimes for her husband, to increase his popularity. In Alcatraz, Kelly always bragged about several robberies and murders he never committed. Alcatraz was known as the inescapable prison because it was surrounded by treacherous water. There were 36 men who were involved in 14 separate escape attempts. On June 11, 1962, 3 men attempted to escape Alcatraz, which became one of the most famous prison escapes in history. The 3 men were the 2 Anglin brothers and the escape artist Frank Lee Morris. The plan to escape took several months to create. The plan was very complicated and involved lifelike dummies made with real human hair and water rafts made of over 50 raincoats. The dummy heads were constructed from homemade cement powder mixture. The men made holes in their cells to climb through using tools stolen from the prison. At 9:30 p.m., Morris announced that the escape would happen that night. That was the last anyone saw of them. The FBI spent many years investigating if the escape worked or not, and resolved that the plan failed. A lot of people think that the 3 men did make it because there were no bodies found, there was a postcard sent to Alcatraz saying that they made it. The TV show Mythbusters also attempted this escape, and they were able to make it to land safely. The Battle of Alcatraz was one of the most violent escape attempts on Alcatraz. As said by AlcatrazHistory.com, it occurred May 1946. 6 prisoners were able to overpower 9 guards and lock them in cells. They gained access to weapons and the cells housed keys. The only thing they still needed was to get the key to the recreation yard. The guard refused to give them the key. The Marines were called in to drop grenades on the prisoners through the bars above. 14 guards and 1 inmate were injured, and 2 correctional officers and 3 inmates were killed. Today I've talked about the history and occurrences of Alcatraz. I've explained about the prison life, the prisoners, and the escapes of Alcatraz. I hope you now have a better understanding of what Alcatraz was like in its era. Frank Weatherman, who was the last prisoner to leave Alcatraz, said, "Alcatraz was never no good for nobody." Any questions?
How far away was San Francisco from the island?
About like a mile and a half. Yeah.
Did people ever escape?
Well, they think that the 3 guys escaped, but they're not sure. Like, they don't have any evidence.